The morning sun rose slowly over Lagos, casting a golden glow across the skyline. The city was already alive, distant car horns, street vendors calling out their morning prices, the scent of roasted corn drifting through the humid air. But inside the grand event hall on Victoria Island, the world felt different. Softer. More delicate. Almost magical. White and gold decorations shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. Tall floral arrangements of ivory roses and orchids lined the aisle, their fragrance sweet and heavy. Soft instrumental music floated through the hall as guests arrived in elegant asoebi outfits, their fabrics rich with embroidery and color. Laughter mixed with polite whispers as cameras flashed and phones recorded every detail. In the bridal suite upstairs, she stood before a full-length mirror. The bride. Her white gown flowed around her like a cloud, intricate lace hugging her shoulders, tiny pearls catching the light with every breath she took. Her hands trembled slightly as her bridesmaids adjusted her veil. "You look like royalty," one bridesmaid whispered, smiling. She gave a nervous laugh. "Do I? I feel like my heart is going to burst." "Wedding nerves," another teased gently. "Every bride feels it." But was it just nerves? Downstairs, the groom stood surrounded by his friends near the entrance. His tailored suit fit perfectly, his cufflinks sparkling. Yet there was something in his expression, a smugness, a flicker of amusement that didn't match the romance of the day. One of his friends leaned closer. "Are you sure about this?" he murmured under his breath. The groom smirked faintly. "Just watch." Upstairs, the bride took one last look at herself. She imagined walking down the aisle, imagined a future filled with respect and partnership. She had ignored the subtle coldness in his voice over the past weeks. Ignored the small humiliations disguised as jokes. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss the drama unfolding next. Today was supposed to be a new beginning. As the wedding coordinator knocked gently on the door, her pulse quickened. It's time. The music downstairs shifted, growing louder. Guests rose from their seats in anticipation. Cameras lifted. Conversations quieted. She placed her bouquet against her chest and stepped toward the door, unaware that beneath the glittering lights and smiling faces, something cruel was waiting. And as she began her walk toward the aisle, somewhere beyond the hall's heavy doors, a black luxury convoy slowed to a silent stop. The music swelled gently inside the grand hall, a soft blend of violins and traditional drums echoing beneath the chandeliers. Guests fanned themselves against the Lagos heat, their gold jewelry glinting under the lights. Outside, the distant hum of traffic from Victoria Island blended with the murmur of the Atlantic breeze. Inside, however, something colder was taking shape. Near the altar, the groom adjusted his cufflinks slowly, watching the aisle with narrowed eyes. His polished shoes reflected the marble floor, his smile carefully practiced. To the crowd, he looked calm. Confident. In control. But when his best man stepped closer, his voice dropped into a whisper. "Everything ready?" the groom asked without turning his head. The best man hesitated. "Are you sure you want to do this? Today of all days?" The groom's lips curved slightly. "She needs to learn her place. After today, she won't dare question me again." A ripple of uneasy silence passed between them. Across the hall, a few of his friends exchanged knowing glances. One of them pulled out his phone, already prepared to record. The groom leaned closer to the best man, his voice edged with mockery. "When I reveal it," he murmured, "she'll stand there frozen. In front of everyone. Let's see how proud she looks then." Upstairs, unaware of the full storm brewing below, the bride slowly descended the staircase. The soft rustle of her gown echoed in the corridor. As she reached the hallway leading to the main doors, she caught sight of the groom through the slightly open entrance. For a brief second, their eyes met. He didn't smile. Instead, there was something almost triumphant in his expression. Something that made her stomach tighten. She paused. Why did his gaze feel like a warning? One of the side guests leaned toward another, whispering, "He's been acting strange all morning." The bride straightened her shoulders, pushing away the doubt. It was too late to question anything now. The families had gathered. The hall was full. The ceremony was about to begin. Back at the altar, the groom inhaled deeply, a flicker of anticipation crossing his face. His fingers brushed the inside pocket of his suit jacket, as if checking for something important. "Let's begin," he said quietly. The music shifted. The doors at the end of the aisle slowly opened. And as the bride took her first step forward, the groom's eyes gleamed with a secret he was moments away from revealing. The doors at the end of the aisle stood wide open, and the music rose beautifully into the air, a blend of soft piano and traditional talking drums that echoed warmly through the grand hall in Lagos. Guests stood to their feet, their colorful asoebi fabrics shimmering under the chandeliers as phones lifted to capture the moment. She stepped forward. Her heels clicked gently against the polished marble floor, bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. The veil framed her face like a halo, and for a brief second, everything looked exactly as she had imagined since she was a little girl. But then she noticed it. The whispers. Soft at first, like a ripple of wind through palm trees, then growing sharper. Heads tilted together. Brows furrowed. A few guests glanced not at her dress, but at the groom. Her smile faltered. She looked ahead at him, standing at the altar in his tailored black suit. This was supposed to be the man who would promise her forever. But he wasn't looking at her with love. He was watching her. Studying her. And there it was again, that faint, smug curve of his lips. Her heart skipped. Why did he look satisfied? She slowed her steps almost imperceptibly. One of her bridesmaids, walking just behind her, leaned closer. "Are you okay?" she whispered softly. I think so," the bride replied, though her voice felt distant, as if it didn't belong to her. Another murmur passed through the crowd. Someone in the second row shook their head slightly. An older woman covered her mouth as if bracing for something. Her pulse quickened. The air suddenly felt heavier, thick with perfume and tension. The once beautiful music now sounded far away, muffled beneath the pounding of her heartbeat in her ears. She searched his face again, silently pleading for reassurance. Instead, he adjusted his tie slowly, deliberately, and glanced toward his friend seated near the front. They exchanged knowing looks. A cold wave of realization crept up her spine. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet until the stems pressed painfully into her palms. For a split second, she considered stopping. Turning around. Running back through those doors. But pride, and fear of public embarrassment, kept her moving. Step by step, she reached the altar. Standing inches away from him now, she could see it clearly in his eyes. He was waiting. Waiting for something. And just as the officiant cleared his throat to begin, a sudden hush fell over the room, as though the entire hall sensed the storm about to break. The officiant had just opened his mouth to speak when it happened. The grand wooden doors at the back of the hall burst open with a deep, echoing thud. The music stopped. Every head turned. A sudden gust of warm Atlantic air swept into the hall, stirring veils, tablecloths, and candle flames. Outside, the faint sound of engines idling could be heard, powerful, expensive engines. Conversations died mid-whisper. And then he stepped inside. The man the city of Lagos both feared and respected. The Lagos Mafia Boss. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked forward with slow, measured steps, polished black shoes striking the marble floor with quiet authority. His dark tailored suit fit him flawlessly, the subtle gold watch at his wrist catching the chandelier light. Behind him, two imposing bodyguards remained near the entrance, their presence enough to seal the silence in the room. A wave of recognition rippled through the guests. Is that? It can't be. What is he doing here? Even the groom's confident posture shifted. His shoulders stiffened. The smug curve of his mouth vanished as color slowly drained from his face. At the altar, the bride's breath caught in her throat. She had seen him before, in newspapers, on whispered social media posts, in stories told carefully behind closed doors. A man of influence. Power. Danger. But right now, his eyes were not cold. They were focused. On her, the hall felt smaller with every step he took down the aisle. No one dared block his path. The air seemed charged, like the heavy stillness before a tropical storm breaks over Victoria Island. The groom cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "This is a private ceremony," he said sharply, though his voice lacked its earlier arrogance. The mafia boss didn't even glance at him at first. Instead, he stopped just a few feet from the altar, his gaze lifting to meet the bride's trembling eyes. In that silent exchange, something shifted. The balance of power. The rhythm of the room. The future she thought she understood. Finally, he turned slightly toward the groom, his expression calm but unyielding. "I believe," he said smoothly, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the silent hall, "there's something you were about to do." A bead of sweat rolled down the groom's temple. The guests leaned forward. And for the first time since she stepped into the hall, the bride felt something stronger than fear. Hope. The silence inside the hall became suffocating. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above, their light reflecting off gold-trimmed chairs and embroidered Asoabi fabrics. Outside, the distant waves of the Atlantic crashed against the shores of Victoria Island, but inside, no one dared to breathe too loudly. The groom forced a tight laugh, attempting to reclaim the room. "You've made quite an entrance," he said, straightening his shoulders. "But this is my wedding. I suggest you leave." A few nervous chuckles rose from his friends, but they quickly faded. The Lagos Mafia boss did not move. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit slowly, deliberately, as if time itself answered to him. "Your wedding?" he repeated evenly. His voice was not loud, yet it carried to the very back of the hall. Interesting choice of words. The bride stood frozen between them, her bouquet trembling in her hands. She could feel the tension radiating from both men like heat before a Lagos storm. The groom's jaw tightened. "You have no authority here." For the first time, the mafia boss's gaze hardened. Not wild. Not reckless. Controlled. "Authority," he said softly. "You invited the entire city to witness a union. Not a humiliation." A murmur spread through the guests. The groom's hand instinctively moved toward the inside pocket of his suit jacket, where his cruel surprise waited. But before he could pull it out, the mafia boss took a single step forward. Not aggressive. Just enough. And somehow, it was more powerful than shouting. "I don't appreciate men who mistake cruelty for strength," the mafia boss continued. "Especially not on a day meant to honor a woman." The bride's breath hitched. Her eyes darted toward the groom, realization dawning fully now. He had planned something. Something ugly. The groom scoffed, though sweat glistened along his temple. "You think you can just walk in here and interfere?" "I don't interfere," the mafia boss replied calmly. "I correct." The word settled heavily in the air. Guests shifted in their seats. Some nodded subtly. Others looked at the groom with new suspicion. For the first time, the groom's confidence cracked. His earlier smugness had vanished completely, replaced by something closer to fear. The bride felt it too, the shift. The balance of power was no longer his. And as the mafia boss turned slightly toward her, his presence shielding her from the altar, the unspoken question lingered in the charged air. What would happen next? The hall felt impossibly still. The soft golden light of Lagos's afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, painting the bride's gown in delicate hues. The whispered tension that had hung over the room like heavy humidity was now replaced by a different current, one of quiet awe, of shifting power. Her hands, still clutching the bouquet, trembled slightly. For weeks, she had imagined this day as perfect, smiles, vows, a future filled with love. But now, standing mere feet from the groom who had planned to humiliate her, the dream she had nurtured seemed to splinter like glass. And then she saw him. The Lagos Mafia Boss. His eyes met hers, dark and steady, the kind of gaze that could pierce through panic and fear. There was no judgment in them. No condescension. Only understanding. Only a promise that somehow, in this chaotic moment, she would not face this alone. A tiny shiver ran down her spine. Relief. Gratitude. A subtle flutter of admiration. Her lips parted slightly, though no words escaped. She realized, with a quiet force, that she could finally breathe. The invisible weight pressing against her chest had eased. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his voice calm, almost gentle, but still carrying the authority that made the groom freeze in place. She swallowed hard, feeling her throat dry. I think so," she managed, her voice small but steady. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Good. Because no one should be made to feel small on their own wedding day." The words lingered, echoing not just in the hall but in her mind. Something about the way he spoke, confident, protective, unwavering, stirred a sense of trust she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. A breeze drifted in from the open balcony doors, carrying the faint saltiness of the Atlantic and the distant hum of Lagos streets. The flowers lining the aisle swayed slightly, and the bride's heart, still racing, began to steady. She could feel the subtle heat of hope growing within her chest. For the first time that morning, she dared to lift her gaze fully to him. Their eyes held, a silent exchange, an unspoken acknowledgement that she was no longer alone in this moment. And just like that, the fear that had gnawed at her for weeks began to unravel, replaced by something entirely new. Something she couldn't name yet. A quiet tension shifted into anticipation. Something decisive was about to happen. She felt her hand brush slightly against his as he subtly moved closer. And in that small, charged space, the story, her story, began to turn. The guests remained unaware of the silent promise forming between them, but the bride could feel it, and her courage, fragile but growing, was ready to follow. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Every guest froze mid-smile, mid-whisper, as if the very air had thickened with anticipation. Outside, the soft hum of Lagos traffic faded into nothingness, replaced by the low, rhythmic pulse of drums from a nearby street celebration, faint but insistent, a heartbeat for the moment about to unfold. The groom's smug confidence had evaporated. His lips parted, but no words came. He stepped forward, then stopped, caught in the gravity of the gaze fixed upon him. The Lagos Mafia Boss, calm and unyielding, took a deliberate step closer to the bride. The bride's heart thundered in her chest. The fear and tension of the morning coiled tight, only to be loosened now by the presence of this man, protector, savior, enigmatic force of authority. She glanced at him, eyes wide, her hand still clutching the bouquet. And then he reached out. Slowly. Deliberately. His gloved fingers brushed against hers, and the crowd collectively gasped. It was a gesture so simple, yet so profoundly charged, a silent declaration that she would no longer be subjected to humiliation. The connection between them radiated like a spark igniting the room. "May I?" His voice was low, measured, yet carried effortlessly to every corner of the hall. She didn't speak. She only nodded, her lips trembling. The seconds stretched, heavy and electric. Guests shifted in their seats, whispering. Some covered their mouths in shock, others leaned forward in awe. Even the floral arrangements seemed to lean closer, as if the hall itself was witnessing the drama. The Mafia Boss took her hand fully in his, fingers entwining with hers in a gesture of quiet dominance and protection. He raised her hand slightly, just enough for everyone to see. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd like waves across the Lagos lagoon. The groom staggered back slightly, his color draining. His carefully curated composure shattered completely under the weight of the boss's silent authority. For the first time that morning, he was powerless. The bride felt warmth flood through her chest, relief, astonishment, and an unexpected surge of admiration. She realized, in that heartbeat, that she was no longer the same frightened woman who had stepped into the hall. She was seen, protected, respected. The Lagos Mafia boss's eyes met hers again. In them, she saw a promise, not just of safety, but of destiny rewritten. And as the room held its collective breath, the first true smiles began to bloom on the bride's face. The crowd's whispers grew, shifting into awe and wonder. Somewhere outside, the distant sounds of Lagos life continued, but inside, the story had pivoted. The tables had turned. And in that single, iconic gesture of hand-taking, a new chapter had begun. The hall seemed to exhale as if releasing a long-held tension. Guests leaned back in their seats, murmurs rippling through the room like the soft waves brushing the shores of Lagos outside. The faint hum of Atlantic winds mingled with the distant honking of city traffic, but inside, all eyes were fixed on the altar. The groom stood frozen, his once proud posture now slumped, shoulders heavy with defeat. The smug smirk that had haunted the bride all morning had vanished entirely. His carefully planned humiliation had crumbled in an instant, exposed, powerless, and utterly irrelevant in the presence of the Lagos Mafia boss. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, a bead of sweat traced down his temple, glinting under the golden chandeliers. A few of his friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing that the man they had idolized for cunning had been outmaneuvered effortlessly. The crowd reacted in waves. Some whispered in shock, their eyes wide at the boldness and authority the mafia boss had displayed. Others let out soft exhalations of relief, knowing the bride had been spared a public humiliation. Finally, one guest murmured under her breath, "Justice at last." The bride felt her knees weaken slightly, and she gripped the bouquet a little less tightly. Relief flooded her chest, washing away the anxiety that had built up since the first step down the aisle. Her lips curved into a small, trembling smile. Her eyes lifted to meet the boss's once more, and in that silent exchange, she felt an unspoken promise that she was safe, protected, and in control of her own destiny. The Lagos Mafia boss gave a faint, approving nod, his hand still enveloping hers. His calm authority radiated through the hall, a protective shield around the bride, leaving the groom diminished in comparison. The man who had plotted to humiliate her now seemed small, irrelevant, a shadow swallowed by the presence of true power. She's okay," whispered one of the bridesmaids, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and relief. The bride took a deep, steadying breath, letting the warmth of safety and triumph settle over her. She glanced briefly at the groom, who now avoided her gaze entirely. The humiliation he had intended for her had been reversed, the tables had turned completely. As the guests began to whisper excitedly among themselves, some sharing glances of astonishment, others of admiration, the bride finally allowed herself to smile fully. Her heart, once tight with fear, now expanded with the knowledge that she had survived, protected by someone whose presence changed the rules entirely. Outside, the Lagos sun shone brightly over the city, golden rays spilling across the harbor, as if the world itself acknowledged the turning of this moment. Inside, the bride walked confidently toward her new reality, a life redefined, a story rewritten, and a triumph that would echo long after the ceremony ended. The grand hall had quieted. Guests lingered in clusters, whispering in awe, their colorful Asoabi fabric swaying softly under the chandelier's golden glow. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed Lagos in warm, honeyed light. The Atlantic breeze drifted gently through open doors, carrying the faint scent of salt and hibiscus from nearby gardens. It was as if the city itself paused to witness the new chapter that had begun. The bride walked slowly toward the exit, her white gown flowing gracefully behind her. Each step felt lighter than the one before, as if the weight of fear and humiliation had been lifted entirely. Her hand still rested in the firm, steady grip of the Lagos Mafia boss, whose presence beside her radiated quiet strength. You saved me," she murmured, voice soft but filled with emotion. He glanced down at her, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I didn't save you," he replied, voice calm yet confident. "You never needed saving." You just needed someone to make sure the world didn't take what's yours. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart, once racing with anxiety, now settled into a rhythmic calm, each beat echoing relief and burgeoning trust. She glanced up at him, curiosity mingling with admiration. "And, will you always be here?" she asked quietly, a hint of vulnerability in her tone. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he guided her out through the wide doors, where the warm Lagos sunlight spilled over polished streets and distant water glimmered in the harbor. Cars passed by, vendors continued their calls, and the city's life carried on, yet this moment felt suspended, outside time, almost sacred. "I'll be here when it matters," he said finally, his hand tightening slightly around hers. "But it's you who decides the rest." Her lips curved into a soft, genuine smile. Courage, she realized, was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. Today, she had faced humiliation, betrayal, and uncertainty, and walked through it unbroken. They paused on the edge of the hall's grand steps, looking out over Lagos as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For a moment, they simply stood side by side, hands intertwined, letting the quiet strength between them speak. "Thank you, for everything," she whispered. He gave a nod, subtle but full of meaning. "The story isn't over yet," he said, almost to himself. "It's only just begun." As they walked down the steps together, leaving the hall behind, the bride felt hope rising within her, for the future, for love, and for the life she was now ready to claim. The streets of Lagos stretched before them, full of possibilities, and for the first time, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with courage, and with him by her side.